Hi, folks. My name is Martin Halbert. I'm Dean of Libraries here at the University of North Texas, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our third Open Access Symposium. And I'm really pleased about that it is our third one. We have been doing this for a few years now. This symposium has grown each year, and partly or largely because of generous co-sponsorship from the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Provost Burggren, who will be speaking to you in just a moment to welcome you here to the conference in UNT. Also, the College of Information, which has provided support both logistically and financially for the conference. And finally, the libraries. We have thought that this issue of open access and how it intercedes with and combines with different topics is a very, very important issue to engage with each year. This year, of course, our focus is on research data management. You'll hear a lot more about that during the day. Just logistics, basic things. The restrooms are down that hall. Also, the food for the event will be located in that buffet room that I see many of you found this morning. And you'll get more details about that at lunchtime. But feel free to take care of yourselves during the day if you need to step out. We have a great lineup of speakers today. I'm very grateful that they've come from lots of different places to give us some great perspectives on current developments in open access in this topical area. Without any further ado, let me introduce our Provost, Warren Burggren, who's going to say a few words of welcome to you all.
Good morning to you all. Martin, thanks for introducing me and also for pointing out that this is the third year in which this Open Access Symposium has been held. You know, you do something once, it's an activity. You do it a second time, and it's a trend. The third time you do it, it's a cherished tradition. And so we welcome you all to this cherished tradition at the University of North Texas. The two previous topics covered current trends in open access and open software tools. And we've had speakers from around the nation. In fact, some international speakers have come in. Many of you have traveled a great distance, and this symposium grows each year, as Martin Halbert said, and we're pleased to see that happening. I certainly thank all of our speakers and our attendees for being here this morning. It's a Monday morning, and I think that I can see the coffee coursing through people's veins, and so we'll get started here in just a moment. This is a group to which I don't have to talk about the importance of open access and open access policies and their outcomes. Many of you are familiar with our efforts here at the University of North Texas. We were the first public Texas university to actually adopt an institutional open access policy, and we have a UNT Scholarly Works repository, which is growing, but frankly, it's not yet the go-to place, and so we have a lot of heavy lifting, I think, with our faculty and our staff in terms of making that the success that we fully believe it can be. This year's theme is a really interesting one, and one that I know just enough about to be dangerous, which is actually probably my largest skill. The national granting agencies have requirements and plans in place for open access and the management of data that comes from their funding. And I served for about 6 years on the National Science Foundation's Biology Directorate Advisory Board. And perhaps a little later in the day, if the opportunity arises, I'll share with you some of the backstory of the discussion that went on and so on that ultimately led to the policy that NSF is providing right now. But maybe for a few of you, I do have to indicate the importance of the management of data just because we are drowning in data. And if you don't think that's correct, consider in 2007 all of the data that was generated in terms of the proteomics and genomics data worldwide. Now, this is not a recent technology. It's something that people have been thinking about for more than a decade, but it's certainly been accelerated. Okay. In 1 week, on the 4th floor of our new life science building, we generate more data, genomic and proteomic data, that was generated in the entire world in the entire year of 2007. I've read that if you took the genetic information that was in a side of beef and you extracted all the information out of that, in today's technology, it would cover the Earth in a layer 6 feet deep of data storage devices. Now, whether one wants to access all of the genetic data in a side of beef or simply enjoy it as Texas barbecue, I don't know. But the point is that the potential there is to literally drown in data. So I think that a workshop that is looking at how we warehouse data and essentially how we store it and make it available and under what circumstances is really going to make for a fascinating discussion. I think you've got a tiger by the tail. I'm going to be fascinated and see what you come up with during the day, and I'll be able to rejoin you midday. So I hope the workshop goes very well, and I turn it back over to Martin. Thank you.
Okay, it is my great pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Myron Gutmann. I've known Myron a few years now. He is currently the Assistant Director of the National Science Foundation and the head of the Directorate for the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences there. I got to know him in the course of a program with the long title of the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program, also known as NDIP, that was a congressionally chartered program for figuring out how, it was a 10-year research program to figure out how we're going to, as a field of cultural memory institutions, preserve our increasingly digital culture. And Myron came to that program from being a long-standing leader in the ICPSR at University of Michigan, which has probably, I think, the most experience of any agency out there in long-term management of data. They've been around for decades and really understand how to curate information for a targeted cluster of fields, the social sciences. Myron, though, has come with a lot of experience. He just mentioned to me something I didn't know. He was at UT Austin for 25 years. As a researcher. So I am very, very pleased to have Myron keynote this event and share with us some provocative thoughts, I'm sure, about management of research data. So with that, why don't we have Myron come on up.
Good morning. Let me get some slides up. I have to say that this is a topic of enormous interest to me, as Martin suggests. So I have the slides up okay if you want to turn them on the screen. Let me make sure I can do this. Okay, great. And so it's a topic of really great interest for me. And so I keep adding things to it. So we'll see how well I do, especially in a room without a clock. So I talk fast, and maybe some of the slides will skip over well. Thanks very much, Martin. This is a really great pleasure to be here. I was pleased to hear what the Provost said. Maybe I can share my version of the backstory with him if we stand in the corner about actually how the NSF policy got developed. Like so many federal policies, it has its own history and its own strengths and limitations. There are actually a bunch of people in this room who I think have contributed to that. So I'm going to talk today about a whole bunch of different things, about how much data there is in the world, about why data matter and why cyber infrastructure matters, about all of the policy issues that are involved, about some of the initiatives that NSF is doing to get it forward, and about how, in the end, we might come together, those of us in the government, those of you in the academic sphere, to work together on a partnership to manage the mass of data that we're developing. And I think the theme, if you want to get to it, is two themes in my talk. One is that there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of issues and a lot to think about. And secondly, that we need to work together to accomplish that this is not something that the either the federal agencies that support research or the university community or other researchers are going to be able to do on their own. And so we need to think hard about partnerships and hard about cooperation and working together on our different roles. So everybody's talking about data. I don't have to tell you about this. Somehow, for those of us who've been data people for a long time, it's nice to see the world discovering data, and it's nice to see people thinking about data storage every day and about data issues every day and about quantities of data every day. I'm still a faculty member at the University of Michigan, and I get every morning the little Michigan Morning Update. And the lead story in today's Michigan Morning Update was that Michigan was unveiling today, I don't know if unveiling is the right word, 2 boxcar-shaped data storage centers, modular data storage centers that are going to be installed on campus. The first of several that each one will hold huge amounts of data and will save each one about $500,000 a year in electricity over a comparable data unit that would be inside a regular building. So there's a lot of going on in this world, and that's why people are talking about it. At the same time, we know that data are not making it. This is data from my colleague Amy Pienta from ICPSR. She did a survey it started out as part of that NDIP program that Martin mentioned, looking about where, this is now 3 years old, so it's a little bit out of date, but this is data. We went and we surveyed people who had received funding from NSF and NIH, and we asked them, well, where are your data? And they said, well, a little bit of our data are archived, a whole lot of our data might be available, and quite a bit's lost. And where are you storing it? Oh, I got it on a website. Maybe I have it on a hard drive. I think I have it on a thumb drive somewhere. That's the one that scares me the most. But I have it on a thumb drive somewhere. Or it's on an email attachment and maybe I can find it. That's a really good one too. Anyway, there's a lot of data out there, and we're needing to work very hard to think about what we're going to do about it. One of my colleagues put together this slide. It is a fire hose. Provost Burggren really talked about what you're producing on this campus. The story is the same everywhere. I'm not surprised that his example comes from the biological sciences, because actually what we're hearing overall is that at the moment that's where the biggest increase in production and the biggest increase in need for data management is coming. But there's really a lot. The next generation that we're really thinking about, and I know that we're going to hear more about astronomy later on, but what we've been thinking about at NSF is this proposed Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, a 3.3 gigapixel camera. It's going to produce 40 terabytes of data a night. The data are produced in Chile. They're going to go overnight to the U.S., 50,000 to 100,000 alerts of things that might be interesting every day, complete coverage of the sky twice a week, and so on. You'll hear more about it later on. But the fact is that what we are doing is transforming science in every possible way, from something that you observe in real time to something that you accumulate as data and then need to analyze in some other way. This amount of data, this 20 petabyte database over 10 years, is going to need to be worked through. And so it's not just a data management issue, it's an analytics issue, and that's why NSF and our companion agencies around the federal government are spending so much effort today on thinking about how we come up with solutions to massive amounts of data. The buzzword is big data. The story is, of course, when I go out, and I go out and make a lot of visits and give a lot of talks, and everybody says, so when did NSF discover data in the last year? Well, no, we didn't just discover data in the last year. We discovered that everybody else had discovered data in the last year. So this is some way of thinking about the future. This is a slide my colleague Ellen Blatecki put together, and it's a nice image of where things are going over the next decade or so from data. And there's a lot of social science data in this as well. IPMS is, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, terabytes of data. The climate environment, climate society data are going to fill up a big gap, but then we begin really to have these genomic databases, the physics databases, and so on. The growth is not linear. It's certainly more than that. The volume of data is very great. The distribution is going to need to be very rapid. And how we analyze those data and visualize those data is something that we really need to understand. Now, it's not just big physical science data. My colleagues at the University of Minnesota, who have the integrated public use microdata series data, have something on the order of 850 million records now that they're delivering based on 765 censuses and surveys, 65 countries. They think it's going to be a billion and a half records in 5 years. And just to put this in context, Facebook has data on 800 million people. That's pretty impressive. IPMS has data on 850 million people. That's also impressive. And these are data that, unlike our friends at Facebook, are readily available for analysis today across time, across cultures, and now increasingly, though, in need to integrate with other kinds of data. And I'll talk about that in a couple more minutes. And to be honest, actually, they have not 850 million records, because that's the deliverable part of the data set. If you look under the covers, it's about 2 billion records right now, and growing fairly rapidly as virtually every country in the world is making data available through this mechanism, through this portal. So we have really a lot of data about people. It doesn't add up to the volume of data that we heard about earlier, but it's an impressive amount of information about this. If all we had to do was to save the data, it would be wonderful. But actually, we have a lot more beyond that. We need analytic capacity, we need visualization, we need new tools for sharing data, we need new collaboration tools, and we need new ways to aggregate, merge, and integrate data. And that's going to be a theme that I'm going to talk about a lot today, because as we develop our capacity to use data to think about societal issues, to think about scientific issues, the amount that we need to do to integrate diverse kinds of data is great. And the challenges of that integration are much larger than merely the challenges of preserving those data. We have the DataNet project. A number of people in this room have been involved in it. 5 funded projects over the last few years, looking for innovative ways to archive and preserve in support of science, and also trying to deal with the tension between active data management. What do I do to keep my data available for my science today? What do I need to be able to do to have the data available for my science tomorrow? What do I need to do to have data available for someone else's science years from now? This is an issue that we dealt with. Martin talked about ICPSR, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, where I worked until about 2.5 years ago. That's an organization that's going to celebrate its 50th birthday this year in support of digital materials. But it is also the case that in those 50 years, it isn't just the fact that the first year they were mailing out boxes of punched cards. Who in this room has handled, as a researcher, a punched card? Well, not bad. Not bad. It shows that we are getting older, but there are still those around who have not. They started out at ICPSR handling punched cards. They've migrated through every other format in the interim in the last 50 years. But what's important to understand is that those are organized in data sets that represent surveys or data collections of one kind or another. They don't merge very well. And the new future of data is all about integration, is all about collecting data in order to be able to integrate it together, and about designing research that will allow us to integrate data and preserving data that has the greatest opportunity for integration. There's still a lot more to talk about. At NSF, we have 3 big surveys we've supported in one case now for almost half a century. We look at increasing opportunities for protecting confidentiality, something that I'm going to talk about. And we talk about integration at NSF very significantly. If any of you are aware of our recently funded project, the National Ecological Observing Network, NEON is really about collecting data on the ground about the environment, but they're thinking very seriously about how to integrate social science observational data into that National Environmental Observatory Network. That's no small challenge, and we'll see how that goes. On the other hand, we in the social science community have a group that sent me their draft manifesto a couple of days ago for a spatially based social observation network that would somehow have to come together with these environmental observation networks. And we're going to have to see how all of this fits together as we move forward. One place where they're starting to do this is in the Terra Populus project, which is one of the 5 DataNet projects that NSF has funded. And it's interesting because it talks about the challenges about data formats, about microdata. Microdata are data about individuals, the characteristics of individuals and households. They're collecting small area data, which is characteristics of places, and they're talking about raster data where values are tied to spatial coordinates. How high is that table would be at a pixel level would be something that we might collect at a raster level, although we sort of hope that our raster grids are actually square instead of round, although that doesn't always work that way. So they're going to collect starting from 3 different source formats, but they're going to then lead to 3 delivery formats in which that integration occurs. Microdata that have attached characteristics, aerial data that have tabulated microdata and environmental characteristics, and raster data. So we're going to talk about essentially interleaving all 3 together if it works. And therefore what you're going to get is attributes about people that are then linked to attributes about land, attributes about small areas such as a town or a city or a county that are linked to the people, attributes of the people in the environment, and then attributes, environmental attributes that have attributes with them, linked with them about what kind of people are nearby, what kind of communities are overlaid on them. So in all of this, we in NSF have tried to figure out how to think about future research. We undertook a project last year, which we called, not terribly creatively, SBE 2020 for the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. We wanted to find out what, at the decadal scale, researchers and teachers wanted to do. We collected white papers. We got 250 of them, roughly. It doesn't sound like many unless you are the one who had to read them all 4 or 5 times. Then it seems like a lot. We made a lot of campus visits. We went to conferences. We went to meetings. Interestingly, there are 44 specific papers about data. We published a report, which I encourage you to look at. It's called Rebuilding the Mosaic. It's online. There's what the cover looks like. What it says is that future research will be collaborative. It'll be multidisciplinary. It will be data intensive. There's no getting around that. And on top of that, it's going to address societal problems and fundamental scientific questions. It's a big mouthful to do, but I think it justifies the amount of investment that the government and others are making in understanding our society and thinking ahead. So we have a data-intensive, multidisciplinary science. It demands an infrastructure that will be supportive of that science. And that's why we're making an interdisciplinary series of investments. Many of you know about these. I just want to remind you a little bit. I'm afraid I can't remember. I should have spelled out all the acronyms. INSPIRE is our interdisciplinary foundation-wide program. The initial pilot in that is called CREATIVE. I'm not a big person on trying to remember what all of these acronyms stand for. CREATIVE is an effort to support interdisciplinary research in new ways. It allows very substantial awards, up to $1 million. It's very much focused on innovation. It has a very accelerated review process. What you need to do is to get 2 NSF program officers to agree that it's a good idea, and then it moves forward. The deadline for this year's competition is June 15th, so if you have a good idea, there's a little bit of time left. I don't know if there's any money left, but there's a little bit of time left because we are making awards on a flow basis. We within SBE have an interdisciplinary Dear Colleague letter out, which is funding supplementing awards that have come in through our regular process. We have a solicitation out on the street about forming interdisciplinary data communities to advocate and coalesce around new kinds of data. That competition is due tomorrow at 5 o'clock local time. So if you haven't started, it might be a little late. Not entirely late, but a little bit late. You might need to leave in a minute or two to get there. And we propose later this summer to have new solicitations, one for interdisciplinary postdoctoral study and one for interdisciplinary research, which will be released in the next couple of months. I was hoping they would be out by today. We've been a little slow. In order to advance our agenda of data-related, data-intensive interdisciplinary research. And that's not all. I'll talk a little bit more. What we're going to need, of course, then, is a new generation of data-smart scientists. This is what everyone needs to understand, that the fundamental thing that we're going to have to do in training our students is make them leave our classrooms ready to handle these new data questions. Because everyone in the end is going to be a digital scientist. Galaxy Zoo is a tool that many of you have heard about. eBird is another. Everyone is helping. Everyone needs to understand. So we have this set of communities. We have ourselves in the sponsoring community. Where is the research going? How do we foster it? The investigators are asking, what questions do I ask? The librarians, the archivists, the curators, the group that I think is really fundamentally represented in this room, need to ask, how can I manage and organize data so that I can help students and faculty answer their questions and do so into the future? These are the issues we're trying to get to, and these are the issues that public policy needs to address. And we need to address it in a way that's sensitive to the broader range of issues in which we're involved. One of those issues is privacy and confidentiality. So one of the things I want to remind you and take us back to our childhood and talk about where Waldo is. So one of the problems about preserving and integrating data and making them available is understanding the challenge posed by the need to preserve privacy and confidentiality. 5 things about Waldo, and I can find him. He's there in the bottom center. He's male. He has a striped shirt. He has a red striped shirt. He has glasses, and he carries a cane. This is equivalent to the story that I tell people about watch what you tweet. It's my 50th birthday tomorrow. We're having a party in the bar, Joe's Bar, that's in my apartment building, and my mother's brother, my Uncle John Smith, will be there. Name, mother's maiden name, date of birth, address. Bingo. Not enough maybe to steal my identity, but it gives you a good start. Well, there's Waldo, and he's down in the center. We like seeing him. There he's carrying his cane. We got him. Now that's scary. But how serious a problem is it? I mean, we need to worry about this a little bit. Well, fortunately, the good thing about identification risk is that it's rarely that easy. Because, in fact, while that picture of Waldo was pretty easy to get through, most pictures look like this one. And finding Waldo in this picture is hard. And finding people in any social environment is is clouded over by the fact that data are rarely very accurate, one of the sad stories. It's easy to get lost in a crowd. There are a lot of men in striped shirts. What if Waldo didn't bring his cane today? What if somebody wrote down the wrong information about him? The challenge we have as we integrate data, though, is that if you have spatial information or some kind of electronic monitoring device, finding Waldo isn't so hard. We talked, as I was coming out of the airport yesterday, realized, and then on the toll road or whatever it is that we were on, I realized that there were 2 or 3 ways that that the public officials in Metro Dallas were going to be able to figure out who we are. I think they probably looked for a transponder. I was glad that my driver didn't have a transponder, but they also, I think, took a picture of his license plate and will send him a bill. There's a lot going on. And with that kind of information, finding Waldo isn't hard. So what if we also know, for example, that he's always by the ring toss? That's pretty important. Or that he has some kind of a frequency-emitting device, like a phone. Okay, so how many of us have a mobile phone? How many of us have a smart mobile phone that has GPS stuff in it? So, I realize it's not all like they have it on TV, so I don't think that you can, it's a little bit harder to get my information than the TV shows say it is, but it is important to understand that we need to protect Waldo. It's like making him bigger. So what we have is a complex policy setting. Researchers want data. Public policy requires access to data. And it also requires protection of privacy and intellectual property and other sensitive information. So we're in this complex, ambiguous policy environment that is where we are going to be in the next few years. On the one hand, data yearn to be free, as it were. The Canadians had something a number of years back called the Data Liberation Movement, which I thought was really a great idea, really a reflection of Canadian politics as much as anything else. But I liked that notion of a data liberation movement, and I tried to sign up, but I was the wrong nationality. But we need to couple that with the notion that we do have sensitive information. And the more we integrate information, what sounds like anonymous, spatially located environmental information is linked to the people who live in those settings. So that's what's setting us on the course that we're on today. The America Competes Reauthorization Act of 2010 asked all of the federal government, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, to coordinate with agencies about access to federally funded research results through data and publications. And this effort is moving ahead very rapidly. And my suspicion, without knowing exactly the details, is that by the fall there will be new and more and broader initiatives to make sure that data and information are shared very widely if they are supported by the public. The U.S. is a little behind our friends in Europe who are about to issue policies that are very strong. We're a little bit ahead of our counterparts in Asia, but we had a meeting in Arlington at NSF headquarters on Monday and Tuesday of last week. And maybe, I don't know if Kelvin Drogemeyer is going to talk a little bit about that in his remarks. And we had a meeting in which there were 48 heads of national funding agencies at NSF. And they were there talking about peer review of research proposals. But the most important topic they wanted to talk about for a year from now when they get together again is about open access to publications and data. So your symposium is timely, and I congratulate you on that. And it's timely to think about the fourth one, because a year from now we're going to be talking about an environment that has changed yet again and will open up even more. We are going to see changes in this year and certainly by next year that enhance access to data and enhance access to publications. And we need to be prepared because the consequences are broad. It's not just the consequences of the things that we're talking about today. Wouldn't it be great to have access to more data? Wouldn't it be difficult to protect confidentiality and privacy? Isn't it challenging to deal with massive amounts of data? But those of you who are in the library community, one of the topics that we hear people talking about now all the time is a world in which data publications are supported by author payments as opposed to subscription payments. So if you're a librarian and you don't have subscriptions anymore, what do you have? And how are you going to do your job? What is your job in that environment? Many of you are aware that NSF has started down this road by implementing a new implementation of the existing policy about access to data by requiring data management plans. Those plans reflect community and disciplinary norms and practices. There's been a lot of variation. We're about a year into this process now, and I think we're going to begin to see reports in the next 6 months about how well it worked and also about how we can enhance how that works. And I know in the community there have been a number of projects out there to build new tools, both to create data management plans and to understand them, and I applaud those efforts. That's what we need to be doing. We also need to enhance our infrastructure for data to match our infrastructure for computation. And we had an advisory committee that produced a data report. I won't go into detail about it, but it raises all of these issues that I've been mentioning here. What's the infrastructure? What's the culture in which we work? How do we make it sustainable? How do we have guidelines? What are the ethics around data? And how do we protect the intellectual privacy that's associated with it? We've come out of that over the last year in our budget by creating something called the Cyber Infrastructure Framework for 21st Century Science and Engineering, CIF 21. It's designed to connect NSF infrastructure investments to make sure that we support computational and data-intensive science and engineering, and to be honest, to make sure that we have a just right cyber infrastructure capacity. Those of us in the social and economic sciences fields often we think get left behind in the search for the biggest, the best, and the fastest. What do we need to have across every field to make sure that we have the Goldilocks formula for cyber infrastructure, something that makes all of us have the cyber infrastructure we need, not just to support data management, but also to support data analytics, data analysis, and the integration of data that is increasingly going to be across multiple domains of science. As we build this, we're going to have very important partnerships in cyber infrastructure with the different scientific domains. We're going to be building and testing and deploying innovative and sustainable resources. We're going to educate, and we're going to think about the challenges ahead. So what are we going to do in the social and behavioral sciences, the area where I have responsibility? We're going to continue to make investments in our existing data and computational infrastructure and in upgrading it. We're very open to this. Our advisory committee met on Thursday and Friday, and one of the most exciting sets of topics we heard about was how to think in the future about data and how to think creatively so that we maximize the value of our investments. We're going to seek opportunities to find ways to provide relevant training, and we're going to continue our programmatic support for infrastructure activities, for data collection, and so on. So we are moving ahead along with the rest of NSF to make that happen. That's why we're making the investments in this building community and capacity solicitation, and that's why we're doing that. It's very much in keeping with what's going on elsewhere at NSF. Many of you have heard about the Geo-Directorate's Earth Cube initiative, where they're doing something that we're a little jealous of because they are making real progress at finding ways to integrate data for the geoscience community, earth, water, air, and sky, in order to bring them together for coherent analysis. It's no small matter. They had a big meeting at the end of last year to try to come up with some formula. They've just made a whole bunch of middle-sized grants to get people talking and working. That's been followed very recently by the big data interagency program rolled out at the end of March, really designed to provide an environment in which data can be managed well at the scales that you've been hearing about. At the same time, we're thinking hard about cybersecurity. We have a new secure and trustworthy cyberspace program. This program is putting resources not only into the technology of how do we think about better technical systems, but also how do we think about better social systems for preserving a secure world, and how do we provide on-the-ground practical development? So it's something that cuts across a variety of parts of NSF. This fits well with the 2009 National Academy's Ensuring the Integrity of Data report that says researchers need to have training in management of data. They should make data available. They should steward data. They have to engage investigators. And that then gets me then to my last set of points. Preservation and reuse of data for scholarship, for science, to improve our world is a mosaic of partnerships and roles. There's no one group that is responsible for it. There's no one authority that owns it. There's no one community that can say, this is my issue, stay away. We've all got to be in it together. It involves researchers, librarians, archivists, curators, editors and publishers of data and research results. It needs to include domain repositories like the one that I ran at the University of Michigan, but it also needs to include these general institutional repositories that many campuses have been building. And somehow they need to find ways to work together to share information and then to be able to harvest the results of that shared information. This overlay of services is really critical. So what we need to do is both somehow cooperate and specialize. And I've talked about this before at many audiences. You've heard it before. We have special roles. The researcher produces the products. The institutional repository has specialized knowledge about what's going on the campus. The domain repositories and the funding institutions have specialized knowledge that bring things together, along with, of course, the publishers and the other people who are putting materials out there. And somehow those layers, I don't have a pretty picture for you, but those layers need to come together. Somehow we need together to get from that to a federated repository architecture. And I know there's been lots of talk about this. The Library of Congress has been proposing something that comes out actually of the work that Martin and I did, and John Crabtree, who's in the back of the room, and others, and Saeed, in the NDIP program. But to be honest, we need to make sure that we continue to move forward on that, and that we recognize the challenges, the opportunities, and the pressures on us to get it done soon. Services are going to enable efficient work together. It's going to start at the desktop, and it's going to go beyond that. So that's the world in which we need to find ourselves. One in which all of the players here and elsewhere that cut across the science community, the repository community, the sponsoring communities, work together to get things going, work together to do that. So I hope in the course of today and tomorrow that you work together to find opportunities to create these partnerships, to create this federated world in which we get where we're going. That brings us challenges. We need to take advantage of shared goals. We need to benefit from domain expertise. We need to make use of what's on the ground. We need to build economies of scale. We need to release data when we can, protect data when we must. And we need to understand the role of cyber infrastructure to bridge data, to bridge projects and repositories and communities, and to make our policies and our needs as a nation and as a community of scientists effective. So we're going to start with training. We're going to build collaboration. We're going to build infrastructure. And we're going to do that in the context of understanding the life cycle that begins with thinking about a project and ends with sharing data that gets ready for the next project. Trust that we'll get there together. Thank you. Questions?
I wonder if you would mind expanding just a little bit on the public policy point that you alluded to with regard to the needs for certain types of confidentiality and privacy and so forth. Specifically, I hear an awful lot and read an awful lot of basically the position is you have no privacy now. Get over it. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Just forget about it.
That's a great question. I chaired a National Academy panel on privacy and confidentiality in spatial data, and we invited some people from industry to join the panel. It was mostly social scientists and spatial scientists. We invited some people from industry to join the panel, and they actually stopped coming to the meetings because they said there is no privacy and confidentiality. So I think we have a challenge to understand two or three different things. So on the one hand, it is true, it is very hard to imagine that we're going to get the toothpaste back in the tube. That there is so much information out there about many of us that it is unlikely that you can put it back. So I have two counters to that, and then I'll try to draw some conclusions. One is, how many of you have received a telephone call in the last year from someone who was trying to get information from you from about another person? So I get calls. We've been in our home for about 2.5 years in Virginia, and we get calls every week still from people who had that phone number before us, who I think didn't make a payment on their Toyota. Now, our car is 12 years old, and it's long ago paid for. So how many of you get calls like that? Okay, it's a fair number of you. Okay, if they can't get it right, how can they get other things right? And so my one point is there's an enormous amount of error in the information that's out there. And a lot of the people that are using information about us, not just you, but about us, are using data that actually they have very little interest in precision about. So, and we did a project at Michigan in which we tried to match, we took a well-known social survey, and then we bought all the marketing data we could buy. And we tried to match people, and we tried to find out how much accurate information you could get out of this. And the odds of an accurate hit are in about the 6th digit. So maybe the 7th digit. It's certainly 1 in 100,000 of getting it right, really right about you. It happens. So on the one hand, I want to say there's a lot of error. The second thing I want to say is that as researchers, and here I speak from at the heart of the research community, we have an obligation in the science community not to shun our responsibility to protect research respondents and people. It may very well be that in the commercial world that they don't have those responsibilities. We do. And we have ethical responsibilities to protect privacy and confidentiality that I am unlikely to shun. So whatever is going on about the toothpaste tube, it's the case that I still have a responsibility as a scientist to do that. So those are the 2 points I want to make. Let me conclude by saying that what that means, and then finally, of course, there's all the legal imperatives that the various privacy laws involving federal data still apply, HIPAA still applies, other things still apply. We need to be mindful of it, and we need to not stand back, but we need to provide research environments in which confidential information confidential data are available to be used by responsible researchers in that ethical framework. So that would be my point, is that yes, there's risk. In some ways, it's not as bad as it would seem. We still have responsibility. As providers of research infrastructure, we want to make sure that research is still done. Yes?
Thank you. I'm struggling to try to put my question to map it to what you just talked about, the federated repository architecture.
Mm-hmm.
But my research, and I'm a PhD candidate here at UNT, my research has to do with health information technology,
Mm-hmm.
specifically the electronic health record.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit into this repository architecture?
Excellent question.
Oh, good. I wasn't sure.
No, you have an excellent question. So what I am seeing in my discussions with researchers is an increasing need, if we're going to solve societal problems, if we're going to deal with societal challenges, we're going to need to find ways to mesh those records, that information, with other kinds of information. So I had an interesting discussion not long ago with a researcher who works on the records of a state that has very carefully prepared K through 20 integrated school records. Texas has pretty good school records. There are a few states that have better school records than Texas. And this research group is matching birth certificates to K-20 school records in order to try to understand the impact of conditions at birth, parental occupation, race, ethnicity, birth weight, other conditions that are identified on the birth certificate with school outcomes. That's a really important societal question to try to do that. It's not directly aligned with yours, but what I know is that the next step in a project like that would be then to mesh the child's or the mother's electronic health records with that in order to get even more insight. Now, how we get there is a huge challenge. And how we get there in the world of preserving privacy under our current law and under our ethical obligations is a huge challenge. But I know from speaking with researchers and with other government officials that this is a fundamental set of questions that we're going to have to confront if we're going to be an effective science community. There are places in the country actually where you can do that. There's a group in Utah, for example, that has integrated health records and demographic records and other public records that they use for some of these kinds of analyses. The question is how we do it well, and the question is then how we're going to make the right policy choices to understand society and deal with challenges in order to get to the results we need. Yes, back there.
I was especially interested in the mention of multidisciplinary emphasis and interoperability. As a music librarian, I was particularly curious of the extent to which the humanities are at all being included in this planning and in terms of integrating data, because we also have data, but we have according we're kind of outside of the box in terms of more traditional cut and dried data, but we have data too, and it seems a lot of the time that we find ourselves trying to fit a pre-existing model and the problem of square pegs and so forth. So I'm curious if this has come up at all.
Oh, it comes up a lot. So we actually have very good relations with the digital humanities group at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we co-sponsor a great program, which I didn't make it into this slide. You didn't really need any more slides, so I apologize for not putting more in. But we co-sponsor a really interesting international program called Digging into Data, which largely comes out of the international digital humanities world. We're hangers-on on this one, but we're glad to do so. It comes out of the National Endowment for the Humanities, but also our friends in the UK and in Canada, the Social Science Humanities Research Council of Canada and the Netherlands. And there we've jointly supported a number of international projects that bridge digital humanities to digital social science. There are some things in the digital humanities that are really just a little bit outside our realm, or the digital arts, which I would also broaden it to that area as well. But there are a number of areas where we mesh very closely, and where our partnerships are very close. The area that I hear, there are two areas that I hear about the most where we come close to the digital humanities, is in the areas of language study and in the areas of art and archaeology, as it were. So we are, we are the main supporters of scientific linguistics in the United States, but there is a whole field of descriptive linguistics that the endowment supports, and we partner with them over things like compendia of texts, digital compendia of texts, which is a really important source of information for both scientific linguistics and for analysis of literature and other things. We're also making some progress at the intersection in the area of how you digitize and represent physical, historical, and archaeological objects, and how the cyber infrastructure you would need to bring together those objects. I know you have a big archive, in fact, in this campus of both physical objects and traditional archival objects, which you're in the process of digitizing. And the challenge that I pose, what Martin didn't remind everyone, is that I was at UT Austin as a professor of history. What we're looking for is ways to be able to say, how would you find a 3D representation of a physical art object from the past? And if you have one here in Denton, and there are 35 other ones of them at the Smithsonian and 15 of them at the Field Museum in Chicago, how could you somehow line them up in a 3D visualization chamber, as it were, and be able to do research work on them all at once? So these are the kinds of areas that I think NSF and the part of the world in which I work are very tightly coupled to the digital humanities. I don't know as much about what's happening in music, I'll have to tell you, but I'm optimistic that if there are opportunities, we'll have them. There's certainly issues related to, in our work in the psychological sciences, in perception and cognition, that make use of information in the hearing context. So let me add that. Yes, over here.
Thank you for your discussion today. My question is around the data management plans that are required for proposals. Who do you ultimately see being responsible for the infrastructure and for the budgeting and funding of the data storage and those types of things? And where would one go to find clearer direction as to what a data management plan is?
I was doing well until the last sentence. So I'll start with that one. Each directorate has put out guidance about what a data management plan is. And we're doing, as we're doing our best at the moment. I don't know how good it is to try to move from that to a more cohesive step. I think you will find in the next year, whether you like it or not, that the criteria for the data management plans will become a little bit more concrete. That would certainly be what I will advocate for. It was very hard until we saw how it worked out to really know what was meant. And so I've been really quite happy with the flexibility we've given people to design their own data management plans. As a person who's lived in the world of data for now a career that's pretty long, my initial reaction always is to say, you mean you don't have a data management plan? And I said that to a lot of people, and because I actually always did have a data management plan for my projects. But I try not to say that too often because it just sounds a little snotty. So anyway, it was to purposefully, I should go back to my microphone. It was purposefully a little vague, and we succeeded in meeting our goals. The earlier question is a little bit easier to answer. You asked who is responsible for the infrastructure for this. And the answer is that traditionally the institutions were responsible for, because we make awards to institutions, were responsible for the data that they generated. And were responsible for accomplishing the goals that were set out in the proposal that NSF received. And so I'm quite comfortable in saying that the institutions were responsible, they are responsible, and they will be responsible for this. That's how our system works. You could push me back and say, isn't this an unfunded mandate? And the answer is no. We've always funded you to do this work. But I think you have a more legitimate question to ask. As we are as the federal government is increasingly assertive about the need for preservation, shouldn't we be better at providing guidance about how to decide what to preserve and how to preserve those data? And I think that's what you see me advocating for here. But I think that it would be inappropriate for us, and I think you wouldn't want us to see us do it all on our own. So I think you need to do some work at trying to understand how much curation to do and how much preservation to do. It's fundamental to archival science, as I understand it, that there are things that you keep for a long time, and there are things you keep for a while, and there are things you don't keep at all. And the art of curation is to understand how to make those decisions. And I encourage people to think hard in the data world about how we're going to do that. How are we going to decide what we keep and what we don't? And when it was a question of the technology improving faster than our data production, it wasn't too big a problem. I don't know if any, this is, again, I have been lots of places. There's in Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland, there's a room that they built when that archive was built in the late 70s, early 80s for storing magnetic tapes. And it's mostly empty because it was built to store modern 12-inch round magnetic tapes. And the current storage media we have are, 1,000 times denser than that. But the data that the government produces that the archive chooses to keep are not that voluminous. So actually the room is now, it's a beautiful room. Last time I was there was a while back, it was mostly empty because they've updated their technology and they have these high density tapes. But that isn't true everywhere else. And we're going to have to make science decisions, good science decisions. And they ought to be a partnership, a collaboration among scientists, preservation experts, data managers, and policymakers like myself. Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Myron. That was a great way to kick off the brain cells this morning to think about a lot of big issues. And we're going to now go immediately into the next part, which is a panel of 3 people. And while we're bringing up John and Carly and Steve, feel free if you want to quickly run and get some coffee. We will have a real break following this at 11 o'clock, or around 11:15. So if we can, I guess, are you in control of this is up here. It's down here. You've got a clicker up here. Okay. So Steve, did you have a presentation that's up here? Okay.
Yep. I think you were going to show me, get me started. That'd be great. And that would be me, Griffin slides. You can just go. I think I'm first through center. No. And then to go down, I use.
You got this here.
But can I?
If you're standing here, you can go ahead and do that
I'll
too.
do that. Just go down, right?
Yep.
So while you're getting your coffee, I want to start with some just a couple of remarks, and then I'll introduce this panel. My name is Bill Moe, and I'm in the College of Information out at Discovery Park. It's great to see this attendance at this 3rd annual Open Access Symposium, and I appreciate you all being here to discuss this topic. While I have a captive audience, I have one announcement to make. Many of you may know this already, but if you don't, UNT is hosting the 2013 iConference, which is the International Conference of Information Schools. There's 37 of them now around the country. And we'll be hosting this conference in February 2013. And I would encourage you to take a look on the website for the iConference and see if there's something that you would like to do regarding data and data management and research data and tools to present at that conference. Martin Halbert is a program co-chair along with Kevin Crouston from Syracuse University. I'm serving in the capacity of conference chair, and Dean Herman Totten from the College of Information and Dean Liz Liddy from the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University are honorary co-chairs. So I just had to make that plug. So let me do quick introductions of these 3 people that are going to be presenting on the topic of funding and supporting data-intensive research. Steve Griffin joined the faculty of the University of Pittsburgh School of Information Sciences just recently in January 2012. He's visiting professor in Cyberscholarship. He comes there from a 32-year career at the National Science Foundation, where he served as program director in the Division of Information Intelligence Systems and managed a variety of influential research and infrastructure development programs related to the creation and integration of digital resources into research and scholarly activities. Carly Strasser is from the California Digital Library, where she's a data curation project manager in the California Curation Center. She is currently the project manager for the Data Curation for Excel project, which she'll be talking about. And the goal of this project is to facilitate data management, sharing, and archiving for Earth, environmental, and ecological scientists. She also presented here on Thursday an overview of the data management plan tool that they've been creating at the California Digital Library along with some collaborators. And finally, John Kunze is an associate director at the University of California Curation Center, which is also housed within the California Digital Library. With a background in computer science and mathematics, his current work focuses on dataset curation, data papers, archiving websites, and promoting lightweight Dublin Core kernel metadata. In an earlier life, he created the UC Berkeley's first campus-wide information system, which was an early rival and client of the World Wide Web. And I've had the pleasure of knowing John for since the early 1990s, when we were both involved in that old archaic information retrieval protocol called Z3950, or at least that's how it's viewed by some people. So anyway, I want to welcome all of you, and Steve?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone here at UNT for such a warm reception and making things so easy for us. First of all, I just want to make a very quick referral to the question from the previous session regarding from the music librarian. I just would point out that the Digital Libraries Initiative Phase 2, which began in the late 1990s, made the very first music award from NSF to an individual investigator to Saeed Chowdhury with the Lester Levy sheet music library, and also made the original awards to the music information retrieval and analysis community. And at the same time, because of the strength of the proposals, the digital humanities became very much a part of that program from the very beginning. And such things as digital representation of all sorts of cultural heritage, artifacts, all sorts of spatial temporal information, constructs, and so forth. And it was proven that the work, at least it was proven to many people's minds, that research and scholarship in the humanities were in fact more successful in advancing IT technologies and scientific applications in many cases, in part because the data objects were so complex that it required altogether new ways of thinking about how to contextualize these data objects and, into the end, to produce a linked open data that we're looking to capitalize on now. So with that brief remarks, my talk will be considerably broader. I'll go well beyond science when I talk about data-intensive research and scholarship. So somewhat required and recommended reading are some of the early documents. Kelvin was a co-author on the cyber infrastructure report, and a very insightful, transformative report for the foundation. Also, a couple of very interesting workshops and a wonderful book by Chris Burggren, which goes into digital scholarship. And then here we have just kind of a layered view of cyber infrastructure. And I'll move more into some of the explanations of this. In a way, there was a chronology, and the original focus was on hardware, computational engines, and then networks. When I first joined the Division of Advanced Scientific Computing in 1986, the NSF backbone was 56 kilobits per second that connected the NSF's supercomputer centers. So for cyber scholarship, it's a new form of inquiry made possible by a number of different developments. There's long stories to be told about all of them, but primarily it has to do with the dramatic increases in capabilities of all our computing devices, of new cultural values in terms of opening up data and resources, open source software. But what's underlying all of our abilities to advance scholarship, I think, are the collective efforts of people like yourselves in building new interfaces and tools that allow us to access and analyze and present data and findings of research and scholarships in ways that advance our understanding, not just in terms of the present and the future, as is the focus of science, which is incredibly important, but also in a deeper understanding of the human record, which gives us a sense in our grounding of where we are in the world and how we came to be in the circumstances that we are. So I'm going to speak briefly about e-science and data-driven research and data-driven and data-intensive research according to this loose classification that was put forward by Chris Burggren and Peter Young in the National Academy of Sciences Board of Research Data meetings. E-science is primarily evolved from the earlier reports in the 1980s, the Lax report, the Barden-Curtis report, and was primarily concerned with partial differential models and solving these with harnessing all sorts of large-scale computational systems. There was an obsession with parallel computing, and a tremendous amount of effort was put into that. But the idea was to get greater fidelity in the models, to build more complex models, to model things from the very, very small to the very, very large that one could not really explore and examine in a laboratory. Data-driven research I'm going to associate with experimental data, which is a bit newer because the experimental data will come through very high performance, high throughput devices. And then I'm going to graduate the data into levels determined by the amount of human involvement required to make the data usable. So getting right into this, here's a very nice e-simulation data experiment being done at Los Alamos, where they have considerable computational resources and a visualization. This is just a visualization of one of the dark matter clusters. This is a Los Alamos Roadrunner petaflop computer. In the works is a 12 petaflop computer to be installed at Lawrence Livermore sometime, I think this year or in the very near future. The astronomers, as Bob has been a great contributor to the astronomy data sets, are extraordinarily well managed and openly available and useful from the get-go. And just even having it accessible on Google is just quite a remarkable achievement. The amounts of data are simply mind-boggling. The X-ray data set from that's being, I think, managed at JPL consumes incredible amounts of data. And we learn a tremendous amount from it. The experimental data that requires a little bit of human involvement and now is somewhat new is a social networking analysis. And this can tell us some new things and allow us to ask new questions. These particular visualizations I pulled off of the IBM Many Eyes visualization tool site, and they're being done at the University of Western Ontario in Canada. But it gives some sense of clustering of interests and other sorts of activities, which will give us, I think, a sense of how our society's values are changing, how people's behaviors are changing, maybe what's behind that, what's going to happen because of it, and so forth. I'm thinking in terms of hybrid data sets as data that includes both born digital and digital data that has been converted. And these, I think, are very important. They allow us to construct timelines and somewhat organize the human record in various parts of the world in ways that can offer new insights and new understandings and new connections to things that happened in other parts of the world, and I think are extremely important in not only in an overall liberal educational institution in terms of the liberal arts, but for people to just reflect on and to get a little bit, take a step out of the present and think about the past. we're also finding some extremely nice tools that go out around the web and collect images, and by knowing the geometries of the photographic cameras, digital photography, if you will, and the Digital Libraries Initiative actually made the first award in digital camera arrays to Mark Lavoie in the early 2000s. So these go out, these algorithms go out and they collect the images and they calculate the geometries and the spatial aspects of the lenses and the optics, and are able to put all these together and to produce a 3D representation from two-dimensional images. And one can fly around these representations. One can fly inside the cathedral. Wherever the photograph has been taken and it's been processed, this becomes possible. Even more valuable to the classicists are the renderings and the capture via laser scanning and other techniques that allows him to examine in much closer detail the features of artifacts than one could under a microscope or with the human eye. It also allows them to kind of correlate how these artifacts have deteriorated and brings material science techniques into it as well. Because if one knows the atmospheric composition and sort of the environmental aspects in which the artifact has kind of aged, one can put, presumably, it back together in numerous, and rebuild the statue into where it may look in its re-rendering as the creator created it. And this is really quite an astonishing thing. One very nice project going on at Brown is where they're taking pot shards, pots that have been all broken, and scanning them and developing algorithms to put them all back together. There's also a considerable amount of very interesting work done in recovering text from manuscripts. This is a case of early case of the Iliad manuscript done in the 10th century, where it had only been opened once in 100 years, and the researchers from the University of Kentucky formed a relationship where they opened the manuscript, did a laser scanning, and then also a multispectral scanning. The laser scanning allowed them to do a flattening algorithm. So the pages were warped, and with the laser scanning and the geometries, they were able to flatten the pages. But then, with the multispectral illumination, they could recover text that was not visible to the human eye. And often that's a consequence of fluorescence and various sorts of chemical properties of fluids in which the inscriptions were originally made. This is an interesting project, the Electronic Cultural Atlas Initiative being done at the University of California. Lou Lancaster is the principal investigator. Here, Lou's taken 1,500 roughly Buddhist canons, from about the 13th century, and the canons contain 52 million Chinese glyphs. And these are pages that are the results of a search on a particular glyph as projected into the immersive environment at City University of Hong Kong, which has a very advanced immersive environment. What's interesting is not just finding the terms in the search. What's interesting is the pattern. If one sees the patterns in which these glyphs or ideas or concepts occur, one can see the same patterns occurring in 19th century literature from Great Britain, Or so then you begin to see the way that humans construct stories about the way they receive the world. And these sorts of insights, I think, are enormously important. Finally, we move into the visualizations of 3D modeling and for the arts and architectures, and these tend to be of enormous interest. The person who did this actually came into my office and said, you know, behind one of these walls, I think there's something pretty important. I'd like to try to find it. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, I think there's a mural done by Leonardo da Vinci. So, well, I mean, there's a long story, but it would have cost a lot of money to find, to go through the wall. But the Stanford Linear Accelerator actually thought that they were up to the job. So another very important thing for the arts community is to do content-based image retrieval. So in this case, this was a collaboration I funded between Cypress Institute of Technology and Penn State University, where they were looking at 200,000 Cypriot icons, and they wanted to just aggregate these according to time period and different aspects of the culture of Cyprus, which has been a tumultuous place for centuries. In fact, still is. There's Nicosia. There is a wall right through it that separates one part of the country from the other. So, using the image-based retrieval and similarity comparisons, one can begin to cluster and group these sorts of things, and that's very important. So, I don't know, this is a nice visualization of the Roman Forum. It's a video. I think I'm just going to pass on this. I can give it a try. I was having trouble getting my videos to work and left most of them out. But I do encourage you just to go to www.romereborn.org. This is work done by Bernie Fisher at the University of Virginia. I'll be happy to give anyone the video with a thumb on a thumb drive. So, what are the roles of libraries? This isn't necessarily a statement of libraries are going to do this. This is, I think, more a statement is libraries are going to be asked to do this, because I don't think other people, other parts of the academic institutions and universities will do it. So there has to be some sort of priority drawn, because libraries, unless they receive a windfall of resources, will not be able to support the infrastructure and critically the human resources that are required to support domain researchers. And so this is an altogether new level of responsibility being placed on libraries. And I'm just ordering them by the fact that I think that libraries can do the most good by curating the data objects that have already incorporated the most human involvement and human labor in creating them. So that as Myron said, okay, you want to find, you have a 3D statue, a 3D sculpture, and you want to be able to find others like it that may not be at your library. Well, that's a very important thing, because we're working in this global thing, global access. So the fact that in order to compute a digital replica of a three-dimensional artifact, that alone takes a tremendous amount of time and resources. And so a collection of those higher order complex data objects, I think, deserve great attention. So I've just placed here a brief slide on some of the operational roles, how libraries might support this. I want to add one important note before I run out of time, that libraries can play a critical role in advancing scholarly communication and in a number of ways. I think that one of the most important is to support the intellectual freedom of the researchers and faculty and the students who are involved in universities. And one way that they can do this is by giving them new means to express themselves. And this might be to allow them to create their own journals through software that's readily available, to publish in their own way what they've been doing. So I'm just encouraging that to happen. And thank you. Here I have another visualization of the Library of Catalogs, Library of Congress catalogs, subject headings under philosophy. This blows up into a great big huge network diagram. But anyway, thank you very, very much.
So I'm ready. Shall I just click to advance? Or let's just start it. Is this one down here? I'm not sure. No, there it is. Okay, I can do it. Good morning. I'm John Kunze from the California Digital Library at the UC Curation Center within the California Digital Library. And I'm here to tell you, sort of take you on a survey of the many fronts on which we're trying to chip away at the very large, complex problem of supporting data-rich research. So data curation in all its forms. The banner of images across the bottom sort of represents a combination of the old world of cultural heritage that we were part of, as well as the new world of scientific data curation is changing our workflows. So briefly, the California Digital Library by the numbers, we provide library services to the 10 campuses of the University of California. That includes 5 medical centers, 5 law schools, and 3 national laboratories. The California Digital Library has 5 programs that are listed here, among them publishing, special collections, and notably the UC Curation Center, which Carly and I belong to. So this is our building. It's notably modern. There's no ivy on this. It's a university library with no books, no students, and no faculty. And it may be interesting for this talk, the sign on the front, it's actually the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory Oakland Scientific Facility. We share this with a very large data center. So this is our roots. This is what we looked like a few years ago in our computing center. We focus on preservation, cultural heritage, museum and library content. The infrastructure was pretty static. We hosted a bunch of services, didn't produce too much software. Nobody really thought about sustainability in those days. Since 2008, we've changed our focus from preservation to curation, which is more of a life cycle approach capturing, sort of doing preservation intervention far upstream, and taking it throughout its life, enhancing the data. We now work with not only memory organizations, museums, and libraries, but now with data producers as well. Our infrastructure is no longer static. We're using the cloud, virtual machines. We're increasingly distributing things via Bitbucket and GitHub. Our services are no longer simply hosted, but we have a lot of partnerships going, and we provide software that people can install themselves. The content itself has definitely moved into research data, and we're doing a lot of web crawling, that is going out and crawling websites to preserve the content there. A lot of that work was begun with UNT, actually. And sustainability is very much on our minds these days, and we're investigating and doing cost recovery for some of our services and looking at some cost modeling so that we have a rational basis for charging. So after a little bit of motivational talk on the problem, I want to basically step through a bunch of the offerings we have at the CDL. There's sort of the basic fundamentals, and at the bottom of this list are some of the things that we're working on that are enabled by those foundations. So I probably don't need to remind you the scientific record is at risk. The very little data is shared. The rewards are very low. The effort is high. The risk is high. If you're worried about being scooped by sharing your data with competing researchers. So it's difficult. There's a lot of really important data affecting climate change, economic change, et cetera. And in the midst of all this, we have to, as a library, we have to be relatively domain agnostic. We have grants to to focus on some areas, but basically we have to be ready to receive data from any discipline. So in this changing landscape is also happening. We have increasing number of research publications, increasing numbers of researchers, increasing number, size, and diversity of content that we're pulling in. All of this really makes the difficult problem harder. Same time, increasing diversity in the number of the kinds of partners and in the stakeholders. At the same time, of course, we all have challenging budgetary times, decreasing resources available. And through all of this, users' expectations are changing. The institutional missions are changing. Universities are evolving. The technology, of course, has a habit of introducing disruptive change every couple of years. And through it all, we have to remain agnostic. And our basic guiding principles are to keep things simple as we can, and open, believing that this will help with sustainability. So in this huge complex of problems, we really cannot solve these problems, but we can try to chip away at them on these different fronts to try to make the overall problem smaller. So here's where I sort of step through a number of these services that we have built and are continuing to build. The first is for stable storage. This is the sort of the sine qua non. If you lose the bits, problem's over. You don't have a problem anymore. Let's keep the bits so we can keep that problem. So this is a curation repository open to the University of California community and beyond. Of course, it's discipline and content agnostic, where we use this microservice-based architecture, which allows us to take repository function and separate out it into small, discrete units with the idea that that's going to be easier to maintain. All of our services have user interfaces and APIs, so the application programming interface, so that other people can use this automatically and at scale. So this is a very important principle. So some of this stuff is not some of the features of Merit are not showing there, but let me go back and let's see. They appear not to be, okay. So essentially Merit allows you to put bits in and get the bits out. You've got access, you can share this stuff. You can put in as many versions as you like, use as much metadata as you care to, but the service is necessarily a bit on the generic side. So as we get new content, we actually develop new features. But the idea is to be as broad as we can so we can leverage as many opportunities as we can. So part of that microservices-based architecture is to separate out the process of assigning persistent identifiers. So we have an identifier service separate from the repository called EasyID, and it permits you to assign, make and manage persistent identifiers, either DOIs or ARC identifiers, and soon we'll be supporting URNs and ordinary URLs as part of this picture. We see this all as one very common problem. There's no need for to tie resolution and syntax together. So we will also, one of the reasons for being so scheme agnostic for identifiers is that we have a lot of legacy systems to deal with. Data is going to come in, we're going to have to deal with it, and people don't want to rename their content. So some of the things that EasyID does for you, it helps you generate citations with which you can get credit. It also provides these links, stable links to traditional publication between data sets and the publications. And we are also talking to Thomson Reuters and Ex Libris about having the content exposed to abstracting and indexing services so that you can track your impact via Web of Knowledge and Google Scholar, et cetera. So the basics are you can make and manage identifiers. You can keep them public, make them public or keep them private. So you can hold them back until you're ready for a publication event and get them all lined up, copied and pasted into your manuscripts, and then publish them all at once. You can decorate them with arbitrary metadata, and we're supporting and driving some of the work with EasyID with this DataCite consortium. This is a global consortium homed in Germany that is promoting data citation as a convention, established mainstream practice, with all the intention of getting, making this a more something you can use to advance your career, get credit for it, and obviously to share the stuff. So this is basically the way it works is that they rely on a network of regional repositories, and they just have a big metadata store, and they are a DOI allocation a registration agency, and we at CDL are an allocation agency, so we have the right to give these out. These are the first, the initial set of members, so we're a founding member of DataCite. During Myron's talk, the question came up about the DMP tool, the data management plan, and we have developed a data management planning tool which helps you construct a data management plan. And this works with a number of different funding organizations, and it was developed in partnership with the University of Virginia, the Smithsonian, and a number of other institutions. So it's a very useful and very popular tool, it turns out, and a lot of plans have been generated. It's quite easy for an institution to sign on and say, okay, we want to participate, but we want to bring in our local policies and procedures and have them linked to from this tool, and that can be done very easily. So essentially, you can customize this tool on an institution per institution basis without having to actually host the tool yourself. So costs. This is a little bit scary slide. It's some math on there, and this is just to try to demonstrate that very nice work that my colleague Stephen Abrams has done. in picking apart the various components of an archival system, workflows, content types, each one of these has some cost associated with it. And there's this sort of first year, a year's worth of work. What does it cost? And there's an actual basis for charging. We don't know if it's right or not, but we believe that we can defend this enough that we can go to our business office and say we have a rational basis to begin charging. And that's not just for storage, but just to do cost recovery so we can keep our services going. So this is cost model 1. It's a pay-as-you-go model, which is the model that we have been using traditionally, but it's not a model that most people find that interesting. If you have a grant that runs out and if you stop paying your bills, does that mean the lights go out and your data is chucked out? Well, so we need a way for people to pay once. Initially it was pay once, preserve forever, but whenever you turn up the microscope on forever, it turns out to be 5 years or forever, whichever comes first, or 10 years or 20 years. But if we can put a number on this, and we can show the graph, based on current various projections, nobody can accurately predict exactly what's going to happen. But the cost of 20 years is probably not too far off from the cost of forever, depending on which hallucination you believe. But we can make a case, and this is very important for us to begin figuring this stuff out. So it's based on the idea that this quantity D is the annual decrease that we expect in the unit cost of preservation as we get better, as storage gets cheaper, and we imagine we get an initial investment that we can, which will throw off some income. That's the quantity R. So anyway, there's some power series, and really very impressive power series you can see. I could show you later, but in the end, we feel that we have a reasonable formula, and happy to share this with you and get more review of it. And obviously, that clearly needs tweaking. We'll be watching as in our first and second year to see how our estimates are going. So another thing that's very important for us is that we are on this Data One grant. It's one of the DataNet grants that NSF gave out, and this is essentially it's interesting how there's supposed to be a map of the Earth. Where all these member nodes, imagine the member nodes are actually located on the planet Earth. Okay. So we're creating is basically a federated approach to data repositories that all speak the same API. They're all working together to provide their data and to provide replication amongst their member nodes to help redundancy. And these are all going to be coordinated by 3 coordinating nodes, which are responsible for directing that replication and providing content discovery. In the middle, and then a third leg of this all is this investigator toolkit. It's a set of tools which have been around for a while and are continued to be developed by Data One and brought forward so that scientists can continue to do their work and make deposits in the member nodes and be discoverable. So this is supposed to roll out in about 3 weeks, and some of it ties in nicely with Carly's talk on the Excel add-in project, which we hope to have show up in this investigator toolkit. Another area where we've been working in is data papers. Essentially, you've got the traditional article, which we are very aware of. It sits on top of a pyramid, really, of processing information and data. And there's a traditional knowledge information data pyramid that has been talked about a lot, but we really want to focus on these data products. And as standalone units without the data paper, without the actual scholarly article. So what we came up with was this idea of taking this unfamiliar object, the data set, and wrapping it in this familiar facade. So the data paper minimally is a cover sheet, essentially, with very familiar elements, titles, author, persistent identifier, an abstract, and links to stable storage. This is just enough information to permit you to create a citation with the possibility of getting credit. Enough information that gets you visible by Google and Google Scholar, and gives you some confidence in the identifier stability. So this is far from what a data paper, a truly descriptive data paper should be, but it's sort of a foot in the door, and it's part of one of the chips that we're chipping away at. Then there's almost done here. We've got this web archiving service is a way of going out and harvesting websites for data that is at risk, that you're interested in and keeping for the scholarly record. This was developed with Library of Congress money and University of North Texas and others for the NDIP program. We have a lot of users, lots of data. This has been going for several years now. And in the data curation world, this is just really, so much of this data, this collected information is going to be collected and analyzed later, and much of it's not narrative. So we think this definitely qualifies as data. Initially, it was developed for harvest government documents that were no longer being printed and shipped to our government documents libraries. So we had a very focused need at first, and now it's really taken off. So here's just a little teaser slide introducing the topic that Carly's going to speak about, a remarkable project for taking the Excel program and extending it to make data more shareable and archivable. So this is a sort of summary of the data curation approach at CDL. And in the brackets, you see some of the funders, the Moore Foundation, NSF, Library of Congress, Microsoft Research are all implicated here, and we're very grateful for that support. So that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Carly.
So I just want to say, first of all, I'm really happy to be here because I grew up just south of Dallas, so I got to combine this with a trip to see my family, so go Texas. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Data Curation for Excel project, which John just mentioned is part of the UC Curation Center's many projects. So just as a heads up, I'm not a librarian. I am a scientist by training, so I came to this by way of Data One, which John also talked about, but my background is definitely in science, so if I stumble on any library-related topics, now you know why. Okay, so first, just to start with some ugly truths. First of all, many earth, environmental, and ecological scientists, of which I consider myself, are not taught data management. They don't know what the word metadata actually means. They can't name any data centers or repositories where they could put their data or get data. They don't share their data publicly, and they certainly don't put it in an archive. And a lot of them aren't even actually convinced that they should share their data. So this is a kind of a laundry list of the challenges that we're all facing as people that work in information and scientific data and research. So let's talk just a little bit about where the data actually end up for these scientists that fit that description I just gave you. So you start any project with data and metadata generation, and as a scientist, you're most excited about writing up that paper and getting it published in optimistically a journal like Nature, and then that journal article gets put onto a shelf as a hard copy and hopefully is also available by the web. But the underlying data and metadata, that bottom part of the pyramid that John showed, tends to end up in computer files or maybe hard copies in a filing cabinet. And then we all have heard horror stories about what happens to those things. So hardware and software become obsolete. Filing cabinets get brought out to the curb because some scientist who's retired has left and somebody moves into their office and doesn't know what it is, so they just throw it all out. And so what we're all interested in is making sure that the data and the metadata instead end up on a server somewhere in a digital format and then are hopefully available to anybody who wants to use them via the web. So that's kind of the underlying premise for what we were thinking about with this project. And so how do we prevent that from happening? We want to think about intercepting the researchers where they're already working. And in most cases, this is Microsoft Excel. So even scientists like myself that weren't particularly fond of Excel and used coded programs like MATLAB or R, we still have to use Excel at some point. Often data go through Excel at some point in the data lifecycle, even if they don't end up there as the final form. So I went out and talked to scientists about how they use Excel. And first of all, scientists are using it on average every day or almost every day, and then a few rarely or occasionally use it and some moderately use it. But about 98% of the scientists I've interviewed, which is about 150 to 200, use it at least at some point in that data lifecycle. And what they're using it for varies depending on who you talk to, but this is the percent of respondents who use Excel for this particular task. So a lot of people are using it to organize their data, obviously. That's the great thing about Excel is you can, it's very user-friendly. You can move in and change your data and reorganize it and transpose things. Some people are using it for visualization. Fewer are using it for statistics. And then some are using for sharing data. And when I say sharing data, I basically mean emailing a spreadsheet to somebody in their lab or to their advisor or to a colleague. So what happened was, I'm used to having like the preview slide, but that's all right. We'll find out what happens next. Okay, so a few people got together at some conferences and started talking about how they can answer this problem. And so California Digital Library started conversations with some folks at Microsoft Research, which is the research arm of Microsoft that you're all familiar with. And Gordon and Betty Moore thought that the ideas that they came up with were good enough to fund. So these three groups kind of got together and said, okay, people are using Excel. They're maybe not using it to archive their data. So how can we kind of glue these pieces together, this archiving and sharing issue with this Excel use issue? And so they went out to set out to basically facilitate data archiving, data sharing, and data publishing. And they want to do that by really enabling data management and organization as early into the research project as they can, so that means Excel. And then in theory, if they can facilitate archiving, sharing, and publishing, data reuse and reproducibility will kind of follow as an effect of that. So enter the Data Curation for Excel project, which was started in August of last year. And the goal of this project is to build an open source add-in and web application. And this is going to facilitate data management, sharing, and archiving for scientists. There's a focus on atmospheric, ecological, hydrological, and oceanographic data. I know that some people immediately say, where's the social science, where's the economics, where's the fill in the blank? Although we're focusing on these groups, it's not to say that that's not going to be a useful tool for other groups. It's just that Gordon and Betty Moore are very interested in focusing on these groups because they tend to be underrepresented in terms of archiving their data for the long term. And so my job as project manager was to collect requirements from the scientists, data centers, and librarians and libraries. So I've been doing that since August and working with Microsoft, along with a few other folks at CDL, including John, to really kind of tailor this project to do those things that we set out to do, to archive long-term, or archive data sets for the long term. So if you didn't notice, we said add-in and web application. So that was a fairly new introduction to the project. It was about halfway through that we decided to tack on the web application. We were originally just going to do an add-in. If you don't know what an add-in is, it's basically a little piece of software that you download, and it extends the capabilities of the traditional Microsoft Excel software program. And they appear as an extra ribbon. So this is, it's optimistic to think this laser pointer will work that far, but the add-in here is not DCXL, but it's just a different add-in, and it's called ablebits.com. And you can see that it just added a new tab to the ribbon in Microsoft Excel, and it gives you all of these new things that you can do within the program. Big problem with add-ins is that they only work with Windows, and you have to specify which software they're going to work with. So this works with 2007 and up. This became a problem for me this past weekend because we had a beta version available, and I'm a Mac person, so I couldn't upload onto my machine, so I borrowed my mom's machine, but she has 2003, so I could, so this kind of ends up being a problem sometimes for add-ins, and they are available offline, but sometimes updates can be difficult for add-ins. So if there's a bug, you have to go back, download the new version. Now, compare that to a web-based application. So a web application is basically something that does something for the user. So you as a user provide information or files, and then the website does something with that information you provided. So examples are Facebook and YouTube. You provide information, data, video streams. They collate that or put it up for you or provide tagging mechanisms, things like that. So there's no program download required, but the updates are much easier. That should be an and. And then the big problem with them, though, is that people don't want a new user interface to learn. So web applications are great because they're useful across all platforms and all software systems, potentially, but they have a few disadvantages as well. So we decided to do both. That way we could kind of answer the concerns on both sides. So what will the DCXL project do? A better question might be, what do scientists need? And so to answer that, I went out and talked to scientists, and I talked to around 150. And the summary of those interviews and discussions was that first, none of them are doing any sort of data preservation on average. They don't know about the archives, and they're very resistant to sharing. They have very, very poor data documentation practices in general. And about 90% of them use other programs alongside Excel. So keeping all of this in mind, we developed a document that we call requirements, a requirements document. And this has a few things that we think that the project needed to have. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because it's not as interesting to talk about what we wanted as opposed to what we got. So what we wanted was that it must work for Excel users that don't have the add-in. We want to make sure that there's no additional software necessary outside of Excel. We want it to be able to be used offline. A lot of scientists go out and do field work or work on the plane. We want it to perform CSV compatibility checks, report back if there's any sorts of errors or problems that might cause issues when they put that into a repository. We want it to allow for automated fixes of those things. So like spell check, it would say, there's a problem, do you want to fix it? We want it to be able to add metadata to the file, so it would be great to use existing metadata as a template to start a new metadata file. We also wanted it to automatically generate some of that metadata based on your machine or somehow sensing what that data file looks like. We wanted it to be able to generate a citation for the data file, and we wanted it to deposit the data and the metadata into a repository from within Excel. So all those requirements got fed into the features that we got, which I feel like we did a pretty good job of getting what we wanted. So the four main things that the add-in will do is a compatibility check, metadata generation, citation generation, and then the ability to post directly to a repository. So this is, you guys are getting like a first peek. We just got these slides a couple of days ago from the folks at Microsoft Research, the developers there. And this is just some screenshots of what the add-in is going to look like. It's got a lot of hiccups and reworking of labels and text and things, but in general, it's going to have a ribbon. It's going to have that check for CSV compatibility, the generating metadata, generating parameter metadata specifically, so that's a little bit different from regular metadata. Getting an identifier, generating a citation, and then actually posting the file to a repository. So in this example, they put in an image and a graph because that's going to cause problems for the CSV compatibility check. So if you run that check, you'll get a list of, potential problems on the side there. You can choose to fix them or not choose them, or fix them. And let's see, you can generate metadata. If you click on a button, it'll pull up the list of metadata that you need to enter into your spreadsheet, and if you, let's see, oh, this is telling you that there's embedded objects in the file and they're going to be deleted if you continue as a CSV. And then when you get ready to post to a repository, it asks you for the name of the repository. You have to put in your username and password. It then connects to the repository for you. And behind this little citation bubble here, there's the blue spreadsheet. That's the actual metadata that was generated by that pop-up window, which you can now see in a separate spreadsheet tab. And then this one generated a citation for the user, and so you can see there's an arc there. You can then, once you have that citation and you've connected to the repository, you can post, and then you get a response from the repository, which will say something less verbose and scary than what this one says, but basically saying, yes, it worked, no, it didn't. So all of that, go back one. So this is just a really brief overview of what the add-in will look like. The web app will have the exact same capabilities, it just won't be in add-in form. It'll be more of a drag and drop your file onto the web application and then do all of these things that are in this ribbon here and then connect to that repository. So it looks similar in features, but it's still a work in progress. They're still developing that. So in theory, we'll have the beta version of this one up and ready for testing. If anybody wants to test, let me know, in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so what does all this have to do with open access? Well, first of all, it's open source, so we're really hoping it'll be adopted by the community and that community users will especially develop the web application and really improve it and make it available for other programs. But in addition to all of that, what we're doing here is getting Excel spreadsheets into repositories. And in this case, initially it's going to connect to a version of Merit, the repository that John talked about, and it'll be part of the Data 1 infrastructure, so all of those member nodes. It's going to be one of those member nodes on that missing map. So what that means is anyone that has access to Data 1 can find the data that were deposited via this add-in or web app. And the vision for the future of this project, so this is supposed to wrap up at the beginning of August, so it's a pretty short timeline. Community adoption is going to be really important because of that, so we need to make sure that the community buys in and that they actually take this tool and kind of make it their own and improve on it. Extension to other programs is ideal, so Google Docs and OpenOffice are used more and more. Making sure that the add-in or the web app can work for those things would be great. Incorporating other metadata schemas, so we're starting out with ecological metadata language, EML, because it's fairly well documented. But we are hoping that other metadata schemas will be pulled in the future and will be developed and made useful. So what this means is that when that little metadata window popped up and it had that description that you could fill out for your metadata, once you push generate metadata, there's an underlying XML file that is in EML format, ecological metadata format, so that'll be useful for any repository that accepts EML. You have that metadata there. So we want that to be useful for other metadata schemas as well. We obviously want other repositories to adopt DCXL and establish that connection, so they have to do a little bit of API development and syncing up to make sure that that's possible. So we want people to get excited about DCXL and push repositories to start making that connection. And there's all sorts of opportunities for partnerships with things like Figshare, Faculty of 1000, US Geological Survey, other government organizations are all very excited about the possibility of figuring out ways to incorporate DCXL into their researchers' workflows to make sure that they're generating good metadata and documenting their data in such a way that it'll be useful and easy to deposit into one of their repositories. So if you want more information, there is a website, dcxl.cdlib.org, and I blog about data-related things there, not always DCXL, but it's a great place to go and find out more about the project. You can get a full list of the requirements, and there's also some timelines and some other things that you can check out there. So as this project develops, the ability to do things like beta testing or to see when the web application gets released, that'll all be on this blog. All right, so with that, there is a Facebook page for DCXL and a Twitter account, and then my own personal Twitter account and email and website are down there as well. I should also mention that the DCXL name has been stamped not okay by the legal department at Microsoft Research, so it won't be called DCXL. It'll be called something else, but we don't know what yet. I don't know what that means for all of the URLs and things. It probably means that we'll have to redirect people once we get the official legally approved name. So for now, DCXL works, and people should know what you're talking about if you ask about it. So, and with that, I'll open it up for questions for the panel, I guess.
So questions of the panelist? Yes, and I was asked to make sure that people introduce themselves when they ask a question, their affiliation, please.
Excuse me. I'm Bob Hanish from the Space Telescope Science Institute and Virtual Astronomical Observatory. Your metadata entry looked to be primarily a manual key-in of information. The experience we've seen in astronomy is that people don't do that. It's too tedious, and they'll say, forget it, I don't have time. Have you thought about ways to either semi-automate or semi-automate that and say somebody might register and be known so that they don't have to go through that effort repeatedly, and then to validate, that they've submitted metadata that makes sense and enhances the data quality?
Is this on? Okay. Yes, I totally agree. Scientists are not lazy but busy, and they don't really want to spend a lot of time generating metadata, which is the big hurdle. So yeah, it would be great to have some sort of automation. The tricky part about that, especially for the scientists that DCXL is targeting, is, and they'll tell you this too, my data are so special, and my project is so special and so different and unique that there's no possible way that I could use the same metadata as somebody else, or I could, you could pull information from my file that would actually be applicable to my data set, right? So there's some sort of a sweet spot between them entering it and us manually generating it, which we haven't hit yet, partly because this is just a one-year project, and so that kind of development would be pretty challenging, I think, on this timescale. But hopefully that's something that individual communities will be able to develop once DCXL is out there. So if the people that work on rainforest beetles all kind of generate very similar metadata schema and use the same keyword thesaurus and that kind of thing, then they could develop some kind of a file that you could upload and pull into that add-in and only fill out the bits that are different for you. So I think that's something we're going to have to rely on the community to really take and develop uniquely for each group. But yeah, it would be wonderful to be able to figure out a way to automate that, because you're right, they're not going to do it if there's a lot of manual entry, for sure. Baby steps. That's kind of what that set of metadata. What did we call it? It's the core metadata for EML. We basically kind of really just pulled out the very most important elements of EML and have only put those there. If they're the kind of scientist that wants to really document things carefully, they're probably not going to be using this add-in. They'll probably be using Morpho, which is the EML software for creating really, really thorough metadata. So,
yeah. And just Morpho, EML accommodates the ability to name your, an existing canonical set of headers and refer to existing definitions.
Other question? Yes. Okay.
My name is Wendy Kozlowski. I'm the Science Data and Metadata Librarian at Cornell University. I think that I haven't actually played around with it yet, but I have followed your blog and really am excited about the kind of work that's being done for the DXL project. As a follow-up of that question, I guess then, is there any chance or any idea to incorporate something like Morpho or other metadata generating programs to interface with this so that you don't lose the other benefits that you're getting with your enhancements of your project, but still be able to have a more thorough metadata set. And actually, I have a second part. If you want to take it now or later, I'm also curious about if you have an initial list of additional repositories that you're aiming towards to participate in the project.
Okay, so part one, interfacing with existing things that generate metadata like Morpho or others that, so you don't lose that information that you might be generating with those other programs. Again, we only get one shot at the add-in because of the timeline. So there's not going to be 4 or 5 iterations of it where we can really kind of tailor make it to fit the needs that we really start to pick up from the community on once we put it out there. So I would guess that that's going to be one of those things that, because this is going to be part of the Data One Investigator Toolkit, we're really hoping that Data One will also take some ownership of it, and that maybe, and the Data One folks are very heavily intertwined with the Morpho folks. So it would make sense that they would try and find ways to really link those two pieces together. And it's probably not going to be a possibility in this first round of the add-in and the web app, but again, really hoping the community picks up on that. As far as the first list of repositories that we're targeting, I think that's something that we're just now starting to talk about, is the it's basically the testing and then the outreach and kind of the plan for unveiling it and unrolling it. And so I've already had lots of interest from people that read the blog that are work at repositories or work at data centers or work, and they talk to the folks at CDL and are very interested in this project and what happens to it. And so I have a feeling we won't have to really target repositories so much as they'll be trying to find ways to link up with the add-in and with the web app. So hopefully that'll kind of take care of itself, but it'll probably be part of the brainstorming that'll be going on in the next week or two to figure out how to unroll it and really, reach out to the community that we're looking for.
Anyone else? Okay, please join me in thanking the panel. We'll have a short break, resume at 11:30 for 1 more hour, and then we'll be breaking for lunch, which will be served here. So we'll see you at 11:30.
Is this the clicker here? So advance
Forwards,
is
backwards. If you need it to highlight with a laser pointer. So yeah, forwards and backwards, you should be good there.
So